Myanmar Army hires Israeli Canadian lobbyists for US
Yeah.
2 million to explain real situation.
Ari Ben
And
Manasseh.
Yeah, an Israeli Canadian lobbyist hired by Myanmar's junta will be paid
Yeah.
$2 million to assist in explaining the real situation of the army's coup to the
Yes.
United States and other countries. Ari Ben Menashe and his firm, Dickens and Madison, Canada, will represent Myanmar's military government.
Yes.
Yeah, Montreal-based firm. I don't know if that's the only person they could get who had international standing, who could represent their case.
So the military hire, the lobby, Canadian Israeli. He has experienced a lot of lobby for a lot of dictator and a lot of authoritarian government in Africa and Middle East. He did, I mean, a lot of lobby. He is former Israeli intelligence. I see he is more expert on military issue, but not about democracy or, nation building. I don't think he know anything about that. He know more about military issue, maybe how to prevent Muslim or Islamic influence. Israeli has a Muslim Israeli conflict, big issue. So he know only military issue.
Because generally authoritarianism is a category used to disparage opponents of one side or another. Now you mentioned that the Tatmandaus, if you reduce this situation to a binary, you have on the one side the Tatmandau, and you have on the other side the NLD. The NLD is the representative, you could say, of ASSK, is the way she's usually referred to, Aung San Suu Kyi.
Democratic government, we can say like that.
I wouldn't call it a democratic government. I call it a dynastic lineage that was being used as a public relations ploy by an elite, and how do you characterize the NLD elite? Well, they want to be technocratic, you could say that.
Yeah.
Lately, they've been quite closely allied with China.
Yeah.
And they are, what else could we say about the NLD? The NLD is, well, they're young and they're cashing in on the lineage of General Aung San, who I hope we get into a little bit in this discussion, and his reputation. I don't think they've managed in their 10 years of quasi power to solve the problem of Burma, which is how do you get the ethnic groups there to think of themselves as having a national identity. They think of themselves as having a exclusivist tribal identity, and within that they don't even agree on the leadership of the tribal structures. So the problem with Myanmar is that there isn't a Myanmar, there's a fractional state. Now, this was the same problem of India in 1945 that Mountbatten confronted, and his solution was partition, which resulted in the death of 1 million people and the transfer of 9 million people in population. And that was a very bloody solution.
Yeah.
So I don't know, I've kind of gotten off the track here. You raise an interesting point. How is this problem going to be negotiated? And one of the ways is through lawyers, oddly enough. The NLD have hired this Volterra Fietta law firm as their legal representative. And they are much more high-powered than what's his name? Ben Mashi, Ari Ben
Yeah,
Mashi law firm. Right. And they are a corporatist, you could call them a globalist law firm. If you
yeah.
recall the
They are
Trans-Pacific
lobbyists.
lobbyists, but
They have
they also have,
experience how to deal with ICJ cases.
yes.
That's the reason I think they hire them. I'm not sure. I mean, their capability of the democratization in Burma, because they are they are lobbyists, you know. They are doing only service for their company, their farm.
Right.
Oh, maybe they don't
Yeah.
have a feeling of national or democratization or nation building for somebody else, for somebody house. They
Mhm.
may not aware about nation building. They are doing give and take. They will
Mhm.
take something and they provide some service. But that Burmese people has to be aware whether it will be go for nation building or not. You know, I'm worried from the beginning. Our direction was not going to nation building, whatever democratic government or not.
Right. So I think you're correct in identifying Volterra Fietta as not being a nation building uh, assistance. What I did a little bit of research into their background. They appear to be a law firm that specializes in international law. What does that mean? If we go back to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the economic agreement that was come up with by the Obama administration, and that Hillary Clinton was a big supporter of, that
Yeah,
Bernie Sanders was opposed to, and that Trump killed, in a sense, and that the Biden administration hopes to revive. What was wrong with this Trans-Pacific Partnership? Well, it was theoretically an agreement for the economic rules of engagement between the United States and various countries in the Indo-Pacific region and East Asia. And Japan signed on to it, Korea signed on to it, Indonesia signed on to it, etc.
yeah,
One of its major features was that when there was a disagreement between an international corporation, like a mining company, and an indigenous government, like the
yeah,
Indonesian government, that disagreement would be solved essentially by lawyers. There would be a tribunal of 3 to 6 professional judges,
yeah,
and these judges would look at the case and decide one way or another. The reason that people complained about the TPP is that it gave the lawyers all the power. They were supposed to be judges in a sense, and they were supposed to decide, who gets the money and who has to suffer the pollution. And Violeta Fietta is exactly that. They are these professional lawyer judges that
yeah,
rule on behalf of globalist corporations as
yeah,
to what is right and what is wrong. And the reason that they were objected to is because, well, you could see that a democratic or an indigenous government like Indonesia would, I don't mean to single them out, would decide to change the rules of the game halfway through, let's say a mining operation, and say, well, we
yeah,
want 60% of the profits instead of 20%, or whatever the original. And if I
yeah,
was an international investor, then this would give too much doubt to my investment. So I couldn't raise the capital to do this kind of thing.
yeah,
And I guess the rules are that is that a better system of justice than the One Belt, One Road initiative, which is the other opportunity, the Chinese option for development. And
yeah,
obviously, Volterra Fietta is better than China.
Of
But the
course.
problem is that Volterra Fietta may work in conjunction with China and not be all that much better.
Yeah,
So-
I mean, Voltaire felt he may not aware whether Chinese or non-Chinese, but they are doing just for their farm business, you know. If their farm, as long as benefit, they will accept Chinese too.
Right, exactly. And the purpose of the Trans-Pacific Partnership was eventually to include China in a globalist world order so that China would have a role to play. And the people who are critical of that say that China will never play the globalist game, that China will always be an imperial power that will, stake out its own empire and screw the rest of the world, or screw the particular country and go ahead with it. So the NLD does represent at this point the aspirations of a globalist mission
Mm.
in Myanmar. So then the question becomes, what does the Tatmadaw represent? So this is an article from the CNA, the Singapore news agency,
Yes.
and it concerns the lobbyists which the Myanmar government hired to represent itself. Now, you expressed some skepticism about this Israeli-Canadian lobbyist,
Yes.
Ari Ben Menashe, and his firm Dickinson and Madison. I think
Yes.
it's the only one they could get because of sanctions. They're not allowed to hire any of the more important or powerful international lobby firms. So this is the
Yeah.
only one that would sort of take a promise of payment when sanctions are listed. Now, what's interesting about this article is that it says what is the intention of the Tatmadaw in seizing power. And it said, Ben Menashe told Reuters, being the British news agency, that he had been tasked with convincing the United States that Myanmar's generals wanted to move closer to the West and away from China. So again, the reason for the coup, if you believe the Tatmadaw, or indeed any of the credible accounts, is that the NLD had moved too close to China.
Yeah.
So the people who are rallying for human rights and for on the side of the protesters are actually lobbying for China to take over Myanmar, which is not a good solution.
Yeah.
And the proposal is being done in conjunction with the United Nations and on a model
Yes.
like Cambodia. So what happened there was China got the United Nations to do its dirty work for them and to
Yeah.
set up a puppet state in Cambodia that would be essentially 100% responsive to Chinese interests
Yes.
and no other interests. So I don't see that any of the talk about human rights and respect for Myanmar's democracy is accurate.
They won't.
Actually, they're only lobbying to have China run Myanmar, and that is not a good solution. So
Yeah.
what are you left with? You're left with trusting that the Tatmadaw is the best government for Myanmar at the moment. I think that's the only conclusion you can
It's not
reach,
the
and
best
that
government, but it is by
it's
force.
the only government.
By force, they are taking power. By
Well, not
weapon,
only
they
by
are
force, by historical precedent. The only government that Myanmar has ever known
Yeah,
for the last
historical
century and a half is a
historical.
military, that if he was to succeed in attaining his objective of an independent, unified Burma, he must keep ahead, maintaining the initiative he had won. The Karens were restive, the communists were a menace, there were armed men everywhere. The next hurdle to be cleared was the general election, held on 9/10 April. So as this goes on, we see that the British under Lord Mountbatten were
Yeah.
unable to do anything really in Burma. Almost all their soldiers were Indians, and they were
Yeah.
afraid that if they wanted to protect the rights of the indigenous minorities, the frontier people, you could use the term used in this paper here, the frontier
Yeah.
leaders,
Yeah. Ethnic
but
people.
they couldn't. Aung San had a kind of a military force. And my argument is going to be that the Tatmadaw represents the legitimate aspirations of the Burmese people as a separate country. They are the only legitimate representative of that government. Now, they're not all that legitimate if you compare them to democracy, but the ideal of democracy, but if you look historically, they are the government of Myanmar, for better or worse. They are the only government that there can be. And how can they evolve into being a better government is the question. And I think through trade with the West, obviously, is one of the ways to do that. So that a boycott is exactly the wrong solution for Myanmar in all cases. But to trust that the Myanmar's military group will evolve into a good government is to have a great deal of hope and faith, because there is no guarantee that they will be all that good. But they are the only game in town. They are the only legitimate government. And the only other alternative is to be Tibet, to be a province of China where the Burmese people are genocided by a Han chauvinist juggernaut.
Maybe I don't say this is the only game in the town. We've been discussed the only game issue in the previous video, it's not the only game. I mean, if we include democratic issue, it's not the only game. There is a option if Burmese people, the military willing to do, there is a game they can play for the democratic side, but the military is deliberately chosen to be authoritarian way of nation building. So that is the problem. As I explained you before, the senior military in 1990 or 2000 during Cold War, they already fed up with the game. This game, I already told you, they fed up with the game. Dan Shui, Deng Say, Ne Win, all of them, they fed up with the game. They use all options to build nation with the military rule, but they fail. So they know that is not working. That's why they repeatedly say in 2011, they say military turn, democratic government. They promise there are no turning back. Several times, repeatedly, he's saying we cannot U-turn to the military rule around the world. He visited too many countries in Europe or Asian country. He promised, but this is unusual, Nobody expect military was cool. It something wrong with those elite people in February in this year. That's why unexpected thing suddenly happened.
Well, what I know and what I don't know, what I know is that or what I think I know is that there were negotiations between the Tatmadaw and the NLD for the distribution of power after these February elections. And those negotiations,
Probably.
yeah, I've seen reports of them. That those negotiations broke down. And I
Yeah.
have seen one or two of the list of demands that the Tatmadaw made on the NLD. And the NLD refused, the NLD thought that they could control everything. They wanted to push the Tatmadaw out of power, to not even give them the 25% that they were entitled to in the legislature. And on a number of issues like the Maidazone Dam and other, the China-Burma economic corridor, they wanted to assert their complete power. The NLD wanted to run the country completely. They got greedy, you could say. And the Tatmadaw
Yeah.
put their foot down and they said, you cannot have all the power. We still want to have some of the power.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if I want to lay the blame at the Tatmandaw's feet or at the NLD's feet. Certainly, there was a failure to communicate, you could say, or there was a failure to negotiate between the two parties that resulted in this as what the Tatmadaw felt was the best solution.
I mean,
And as
we
outside
can
observers,
we can blame both of them because historically military behavior is they always want upper hand. So even this small dispute,
mhm,
they can, exaggerate that to make the whole country collapse. That is behavior of military, which means they don't
I don't think in their
aware
mind that,
anyone, they don't listen anybody, they undermine anybody. That is against democracy. You cannot do in democracy government or any legitimate government. You have to obey. You have to follow the constitution, the civilian government, something like that.
mhm,
So that military behavior, historically, they, they have a virus, I've been telling you. That virus caused the behavior always change. Sometimes they disappear, but sometimes the virus still alive, appear to be the authoritarian dictatorship. We need to kill the virus, then military issue will be clear. And second thing is, as I told you, the NLD has a bullshit, NLD is bullshit, as I told you. Suu Kyi was unprepared, and her surrounding NLD people are bullshit. They could not foresee the future of the country. They could not foresee the military behavior. They could not prevent anything. They all are bullshit. They all are pushing Suu Kyi to the front, face-to-face confrontation with the military. If the party NLD is a good mood, they won't do their very important leaders to confront with those danger confrontation with the military. They should some prevention or some arrangement to ease the tension and to make agreeable for solution. They do not make solution, just they are emotionally motivated and they are just bullying, that is the behavior of Bangladesh. They are bullying. They did not make consensus and negotiation with anybody. they are just bullying in the politics. That's always happen in Burmese political culture. That's
You
why we have already clash point, you know,
mhm.
because they are
You said it,
bullying.
you said in our last or one of our previous conversations that something that I thought was quite insightful, that
Yes,
during the 10 years of Aung San's power, or you could say Aung San, the clique that was using Aung San as their sort of poster boy, the NLD's power.
yes,
By the way, they remind me quite a bit of the leadership of the sort of Clinton Obama
yeah,
clique in the United States, and this was detailed in an article called "The Obama Knots." That is, they were infatuated with the sort of West Wing TV show, technocratic. They were, as you said, bullshit or functionless. They were not very competent as technocrats, although they imagined themselves to be very meritocratic and competent. In fact,
yeah,
they were incredibly incompetent. Well, to get back to the point, that she had a lot of charisma and international
yes,
visibility, and she could have used that to create a network of international connections with Switzerland, with Germany,
yeah,
with the United States, with other countries, and create a base of power, the power being the international connections that would have
yes,
allowed for an internationalization or a modernization process in Burma, but she
yeah,
didn't.
yeah.
What
She
she
did
did
not.
was she allowed China to continue to run Burma, and she essentially, put a cover over that. She put a front over that.
Yeah,
That was, I guess, not very convincing to at least to the Tatmadaw. And so, again, as sort of international observers or people on the other side of the fence looking in here,
yeah,
I think we have a responsibility to look at the history of the situation and not to jump to conclusions. Most of the talk on the mass media and
yeah,
the German media and the other has been of human rights and of a situation, a narrative where you have a barbarian, dictatorial, authoritarian, or uh, uh, Tatmadaw. They
yeah,
usually don't use that word. They just say Myanmar dictatorship or military
yeah,
dictatorship or something like that versus the people. Well, this should be recognized right away as a romantic fantasy, and that there is no human rights tragedy going on in Myanmar in those simplistic terms. There is
yeah,
a struggle for power between various factions, and we don't know enough about on the ground to know who is protesting and why.
yeah,
And these protests have been, we can say, I guess, rather thin on the ground in a sense. And they may represent like a pro-China faction,
yeah,
and they may that they represent the overwhelming will of the people. I think you can't conclude that. They don't represent that. There are not enough of the protests, and they are not widespread enough for one to say that. But they do represent certain factions, some of which may be simply opportunistic.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
People who are rebelling against the lockdown.
yeah.
So
I
the
mean, because of political turmoil, it become human right violation. Because of political turmoil, it's become human right violation. As you said, the human right violation is not the first thing.
hmm,
It's the secondary consequences of political turmoil. So in that
right.
way, it is a human right violation in Burma because the military kill the kids and
Mhm,
innocent people is a human right violation, crime against humanity.
mhm,
So, however, I mean that, as you said, Aung San Suu Kyi is not perfect, we are already discussed before. She is only good for democratization,
Mhm.
initiating, but she is not perfect to follow up and to build a complete nation building. That should be, supplemented by her party or her advisor surrounding her. But those all NLD, her party, and all surrounding her are bullshit. Nobody could supply any, tangible idea,
Mhm.
advice. So that become, turmoil. Aung San Suu Kyi lost her direction. It's directly confront with military, and then they are crushed. So this is NLD and Burmese politic behavior. Burmese political culture is I don't like. They are unmature and they are not, you know, willing to negotiate or open discussion and to get a good idea and advice from the people, from the expert.
Mhm.
Instead of they are bullying, they are doing politics. Because we are in power, we will do whatever we want. We'll decide whatever we want. That never can reach the goal. That is Burmese political behavior. That's so bad. It's not only in military, even in civilian political party. Political culture is still immature and very bad, their political culture.
Mhm. With regard to the leadership, somebody has to be in control. But if you look up, again, you see China, you see Japan, you see Russia, maybe you see India,
Yes.
and so you have people like the NLD, acting as puppets for the Chinese, or you have the military really in the same position.
Yeah.
So it's a kind of a game of musical chairs in a way, and the military is not above, has not been. Well, they didn't really have any choice. When there are sanctions in place, they have to deal with the Chinese.
Yeah.
So
I
well,
don't agree sanction too. Sanction should not impose on Burma, but it must divert to some private business or some ethnic business or some minority or individual. That
mhm.
way they can divert, but it should not impose sanction. But I think the meaning of sanction is uh, to not let benefit the military. They are doing in that way. I think it's not bad compared to the previous sanction.
Well, I disagree. I don't think there are any such things as smart sanctions, in a sense that there are any such things as smart bombs.
Yeah,
They end up having a lot of collateral damage, and I guess all of it hinges on one's definition of a lot and whether
yeah.
that's acceptable or
It
not.
is not clear cut idea. It's
Hmm.
more or less it's always mixed because
Right.
if you do business, you have to in touch with the military authority in the country. That is the reality.
Well, let me make 2 points here, before we conclude. One point is that the military government is the only legitimate government of Burma has only been, and in the future will only be, unless something unforeseen or hitherto unidentified emerges. And the second point is that the talk of human rights, the talk of sanctions, all is part of the game plan where the Chinese end up taking over Burma, and that clearly the Chinese think of Burma as their sovereign territory. They don't think of Myanmar as an independent country. They will never respect Myanmar as an independent country. They only see it as an area for future conquest. However, defeating Burma or destroying Myanmar themselves with their own military equipment would be very expensive for a lot of reasons. So they would rather have the international community destroy Burma for them, so then they can come in as the only way to keep Burma a stable country. They often use the word stability in their I've heard
Chinese strategy.
Right. I've heard international experts who are quite informed about the situation in Burma, but resign themselves because they're in the financial field to the fact that China will eventually run Burma. So what is the easiest way to let that happen? They, in a sense, have no respect for the Burmese culture. They only see money.
Of course.
But these people at least know what's going on in Burma, whereas most of the people who are screaming about human rights or screaming for sanctions really don't know anything about the country. They only see authoritarian dictatorship and the people. And it could be any people, it could be any authoritarian dictatorship. And so that view is, to me, the most pernicious.
Chinese is playing very dirty game. They don't absolutely not aware about people. They don't taste with human right and democracy. All these good things they ignore. They only engage with authoritarian dictatorship and gang terrorists. Chinese playing very dirty game. That we know. He has veto power in the international politics. That US and Western countries are stuck because China has veto power. They cannot make complete solution or anything, and they have a strategy, raw and mass. That's all. Chinese is very strategic planning. That's Burmese military is falling in the trap. It's not for Burmese benefit, but that is for Chinese benefit and Chinese strategy benefit. So it means it will be failing democracy in Burma, and democracy in the world is failing. So even US, British, they have veto, but they could not use effectively, and they cannot use very strategically to influence democracy in the region, because Chinese is using their strategy defensive way, but they are certainly to get advantage. US has no advantage. I mean, Western countries has no advantage. Democracy is going to fail if they could not prevent anything at the moment.
Yeah, unfortunately, the Western countries are not of one on this, and oftentimes they end up carrying the laundry or doing the dirty work for the Chinese because of this Violeta Fiera kind of connections. Fiera, the globalist thing, sees themselves eventually working together with China. So they're in a sense happy to have the Chinese destroy Myanmar to make it part of a globalist system.
So the last 2 months, we can see Burmese is a failed state, neither military nor democratic government can consolidate.
I wouldn't go
They
so
could not
far as
control.
to say that Burma is a failed state. It's
It's failed state. Till now, it's failed
any
state.
more
We don't know next month.
any more than it was. Well,
Nation building in Burma through military weapon with power politics. That is military strategy in Burma. And what about civilian government? Now they are out of the country, military control the army, all the weapon. They control the parliament, and they control government house and all the president office and everything. In terms of power politics, they control the power, but it doesn't mean the public population across the country agree. No, they protest. Now it is right, and the country is collapsing. That is a military real politics situation. But civilian government, they are supported by the population, but they don't have the strategic power, like power. They cannot control the army. They cannot control government office, and they cannot control any security forces and government and legal empowerment, the court and all these things. Civilian cannot control. So this situation, that's why I'm telling it is a failed state so far in 2 months in Burma. So what we need from the side of civilian government, they need architect, because of the current situation. There is no throne. I've been telling you before, we don't have throne. The civilian, even they are elected, it is not applicable in Burma right now. There is no seat, no throne for elected people, because of the situation is not allow them to have power in Burma. So the government side, for me, the most important is now architect who know how to build nation. We don't need elected or anything, because that is not applicable right now. Even you are elected, there's no throne, no seat for the power.
Yeah, the problem
That's why
with the elect.
My point is, it is not applicable for the elected, because they want to point out the civilian government, NLD and those things, because they are elected. So they want to claim they can do everything. No, it's not applicable in current situation in Burma.
Yeah,
so what we need in Burma is we need architect. We don't need anybody. We just need architect. Who can build the country.
What you're trying to,
that is the
what
point.
you're trying. Yeah, what you're trying to say is that the process of nation building never really started. From 1945, the problem was the Kachin state and the other 135 different ethnic minority groups, if you want to term them that way, tribal groups, were not forged into were not forged into one nation. Aung San was representing, General Aung San was representing, at best, a faction of the Burmese, which is the majority.
He is potential architect for nation building.
he was a
Yep.
potential architect, but even
Yeah, he did not yet
did
done.
not have a way of incorporating. He promised the Kachin and the Shan, as we saw in that article, that they would be essentially separate states, autonomous states. And that was in a sense a lie.
Because I
So,
can say he is potential architect because he has blueprint. Son has a blueprint, and I check all his knowledge. He is a fall in the category of international system and political science system. He know well politics. He studied political science as well. He know also international system well. So, and also he know about ethnic issue. He know federal system issue. So among Burman group, among the mainland Burman group, I check his opinion, his idea about nation building. Nation building. His blueprint is realistic. It is scientific. His plan of scientific. It is possible and it is intact with international political science, international system. That's why I strongly believe he is a potential architect, but the problem is he could not deliver his plan before that he was assassinated. That is the issue. The other Burman leader, they are not qualified to be architect. That's so far we have seen in the past. So now we need architect, how to build. We don't need elected or any. There is nothing to interesting to get a power position, what ministry or whatever president or whatever position in a new government, so-called new government. Nothing interesting. There's nothing to do with those position and those title. We just need who has no scientific way of nation building. That's it. The problem of Burmese civilian democratic government is now they are competition for the position in the government, who get ministry job and who get which position and which title. But they are not competing how to build the nation, who has able to build. You know, it's about scientific way of building. We cannot build the country. I've been repeatedly telling with emotion. We cannot build the country by emotion just because we have a feeling for somebody or for something or some religion or some ethnic or personal worship. We cannot do such kind of nation building. You know, we cannot build one-man show nation building. Now we have to do scientific way, strategically, how the nation can survive, you know, scientific way. That's we need right now. But you know, the situation right now is nobody think about that. Nobody are preparing for that. They are not preparing for that at the moment. We need that.
I would say that's the Russians, and we'll get to that in a minute. First, to analyze the current impasse, you could view the current civil war, if you want to characterize it that way, or in Myanmar as a conflict between Burmese elites. So the NLD is a Burmese elite and the top Mandao is a Burmese elite. And both of them are struggling to say who is the leader of the Burmese people.
Yes.
And then the second question which you raise is who has the interest of the other 40% of Myanmar. of all the different ethnic groups. And I think the answer to that question is the Tatmadaw, because the NLD has been backing the first past the post election system, which puts all of the Burmese in power. The last election was not democratic. What it did is it just put in power all of the Burmese elites. It did not allow any of the ethnic groups to have adequate representation. And the Tatmadaw is arguing that they should change to a proportional representation system and do away with this first past the post system, which allows for the Burmese. So
I mean, election system is nothing wrong, but the thing is,
no, there is something wrong with the election system.
Oh no,
the election system is not
immature. It's not mature and not not fit.
It's not giving adequate representation to the minority ethnic groups. Now, if they had adequate representation, yeah, I would argue that the best option at the moment is Russia.
You mean for military side, nation building?
For nation building as well, because they have an excellent track record in Mongolia and in Afghanistan, of building up, of nation building, really. They've always been hampered in this by the United States and by this kind of, and you could say by China, by the anti-Russianness, Russophobia and Red Scare, but they have a pretty good record.